The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers at exactly 11:47 p.m., clattering against the concrete floor of my garage like a gunshot in the silence. That's when I heard my 17-year-old daughter Emily's voice cutting through the thin walls of our house, sharp enough to slice steel. "You know Dad always loses, Mom. Who cares if he finds out? Richard's going to take care of us anyway." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I froze beneath the rusted belly of my pickup truck, motor oil dripping onto my forehead like tears I refused to shed. 20 years of marriage, and my own daughter was talking about me like I was already dead and buried. My wife Lila's response came muffled but clear. "Keep your voice down. Jake's still outside." Jake, not your father or dad. Just Jake, like I was some stranger who happened to live in their house and pay their bills. I crawled out from under the truck, wiping my hands on a rag that had seen better decades. The November air bit through my flannel shirt as I stood in the doorway, watching shadows move behind our kitchen curtains. My family, or what was left of it, plotting my irrelevance. Welcome to my life in scenic Millfield, Ohio, where the steel mills died 20 years ago, but the dreams of their workers are still rotting in the ground. I'm Jake Baker, 42 years old, owner of Baker Construction, a business that's been circling the drain ever since the city started giving all the good contracts to companies with connections I'll never have. I used to box, back when I thought my fists could solve problems. Now I fix things for a living, which is ironic, since I can't seem to fix the one thing that matters most. My marriage to Lila Morrison Baker, junior partner at Morrison, Klein & Associates, the kind of law firm that smells like expensive cologne and broken promises. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. I sat at our kitchen table, nursing coffee that tasted like disappointment, when Lila breezed in wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. "Morning," she said without looking at me, her attention focused on her phone screen. "Anything interesting at the Hilton last night?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. Her fingers paused over her phone. "What?" "Just wondering about your late meeting. Hope it was productive." Lila's eyes narrowed. "You're being paranoid again, Jake. It's not attractive." "Neither is lying, but here we are." She grabbed her purse, a leather monstrosity that cost more than some people's rent, and headed for the door. "I don't have time for your insecurity this morning." After she left, I did something I'd never done in 20 years of marriage. I went through her things. Call it paranoia, call it desperation, call it whatever you want. I call it survival. The burner phone was hidden in a zippered compartment of her purse, tucked behind tampons and breath mints like a dirty secret wrapped in feminine hygiene. The text made my stomach turn, and my hands shake with rage I hadn't felt since my boxing days. "Richard, last night was incredible. When can we do it again?" "Lila, soon. Jake's working late on the Henderson project all week." "Richard, good. I transferred another $5,000 to your account. Buy yourself something pretty." "Lila, you spoil me. Emily loves the new car, by the way. She thinks you're amazing." "Richard, she's a smart girl. Takes after her mother." I scrolled through weeks of messages, each one a knife twist in my gut. Hotel reservations, cash transfers, plans for a future that didn't include me. My wife wasn't just cheating, she was being bought, paid for like a high-end escort with a law degree. The worst part? Richard Morrison was her boss, the managing partner at her firm. 50 years old, silver-haired, drives a BMW that costs more than my house. I'd met him at office parties, shaken his soft hand while he smiled that practice smile and called me sport, like I was some kid playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. I took photos of every message, every bank transfer, every hotel receipt. Then I put the phone back exactly where I found it and went to work, because that's what guys like me do. We show up, we do the job, we keep our mouths shut and our heads down, but something had changed in me that morning. Something cold and calculating had taken root where my heart used to be. That evening, I followed my wife. Lila told Emily she had another late meeting, kissed our daughter's forehead like a loving mother, and drove her new Lexus, paid for with Richard's dirty money, to Romano's, the kind of upscale restaurant where they charge $30 for a piece of fish and call it cuisine. I parked across the street and watched Richard's BMW pull up. Watched my wife slide into his passenger seat like she'd done it 1,000 times. Watched them drive away to whatever hotel they'd picked for tonight's performance. I'd never been inside Richard's penthouse before, but I knew where it was. Everyone in Millfield knew about the Morrison building. 12 stories of glass and steel that Richard's daddy built back when the mills were still running. Richard lived in the penthouse, naturally, because men like him always rise to the top like scum on pond water. Getting inside was easier than it should have been. Lila had mentioned the security code in one of her texts, Richard's birthday, because he was just that narcissistic. The doorman had gone home hours ago, and the building's security system was about as sophisticated as a screen door. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The penthouse door was solid oak with brass fixtures that probably cost more than my truck. I used the key code, 1205, December 5th, Richard's birthday, and stepped into another world. The place screamed money. Marble floors, leather furniture, abstract art that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto canvas and called it genius. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of our dying city that somehow looked beautiful from this height, like viewing a corpse through rose-colored glasses. I found Richard's BMW in the underground garage and got to work. The dead fish came from my tackle box, a nice fat catfish that had been sitting in my freezer since last summer's fishing trip. I wedged it deep into his air conditioning intake where it would slowly rot and fill his precious car with the smell of decay. Then I took my house key and carved thief into the driver's side door, each letter deep enough to reach the metal beneath the paint. It felt good, therapeutic even, like lancing an infected wound. I was heading back to the elevator when I heard the security camera whir and click behind me. My blood turned to ice as I realized I'd been so focused on revenge that I'd forgotten about surveillance. Well, I muttered to myself, that's going to cost me. I made it to my truck and drove home, adrenaline and dread warring in my chest. I'd crossed a line tonight, stepped over the boundary between victim and perpetrator. There was no going back now. The next morning, Lila's phone buzzed during breakfast. She read the message, and her face went white as fresh snow. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I could guess what she was reading. Someone vandalized Richard's car last night, and there's security footage. "That's terrible," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Any idea who might do something like that?" Lila's eyes met mine across the table, and I saw the exact moment she realized what I'd done. The exact moment she understood that her harmless, losing husband might not be as harmless as she thought. "Jake," she said slowly, "what did you do?" I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I'd worn in months. "Me? I was here all night, working on my truck. You can ask Emily." But Emily had already left for school, and we both knew it. The call came 3 days later, while I was trying to salvage what was left of my business. The Henderson project, a small office renovation that should have been routine, had suddenly become a nightmare of permit delays and code violations that appeared out of nowhere like locusts in Egypt. "Baker Construction," I answered, phone wedged between my shoulder and ear while I sorted through rejection letters from the city planning department. "Mr. Baker, this is Janet from Morrison, Klein & Associates. Mr. Morrison would like to schedule a meeting with you regarding some recent incidents." I almost laughed. Richard Morrison wanted to see me. The man who was screwing my wife wanted to have a chat about property damage. The balls on this guy could fill a wheelbarrow. "Tell Mr. Morrison I'm busy," I said. Maybe he should stick to what he's good at, screwing people over. Janet's professional composure cracked slightly. "Sir, I don't think you understand. This isn't a request." "Everything's a request when you're not the cops, sweetheart. Have a blessed day." I hung up and immediately called Frank Kowalski, owner of Kowalski's Tavern and the closest thing I had to a best friend in this godforsaken town. Frank was ex-police, the kind of guy who knew where all the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig half the graves. "Franks," he answered on the second ring. "It's Jake. I need a favor." "What kind of favor? The legal kind or the kind that requires plastic sheeting?" "The legal kind. I need you to recommend a private investigator, someone good, someone discreet." Frank was quiet for a moment. "You sure you want to go down this road, Jake? Sometimes it's better not to know." "I already know. Now I need proof." "Vince Carrera. Used to work Vice in Cleveland before he went private. He's expensive, but thorough. I'll text you his number." Within an hour, I was sitting across from Vincent Carrera in a diner that had seen better decades. Vince was thin and sharp-featured, with the kind of eyes that missed nothing and forgot less. He looked like he lived on cigarettes and cynicism, which probably wasn't far from the truth. "Your wife's cheating," he said after I'd explained the situation. "You've got evidence. What exactly do you need me for?" "I want to know everything. How long it's been going on, how much money's changed hands, who else knows. I want to know what I'm really dealing with here." Vince stirred sugar into coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. "That kind of investigation takes time, and money." I slid an envelope across the table. "There's $5,000, my daughter's college fund, but she'll understand someday." "What's your endgame here, Jake? You planning to divorce her?" I thought about that for a moment, really considered it. I don't know yet. Right now, I just want the truth. The truth has a way of changing people, Vince warned. You sure you're ready for that? I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded anyway. 2 weeks later, Vince delivered a manila folder that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside were photos, financial records, phone logs, and a timeline that made my 20-year marriage look like an elaborate con game. The affair had been going on for 8 months. Richard had given Lila over $50,000 in gifts. The Lexus, jewelry, clothes, even Emily's new laptop. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Maggie Chen, Lila's supposed best friend since college. Maggie had been feeding Richard information about me for months, my work schedule, my financial problems, even details about my depression after losing the Morrison building renovation contract. She'd been paid $10,000 for her betrayal, money that showed up in her account the same week Lila moved into the guest bedroom. I sat in my truck in the diner parking lot, staring at photos of my wife and Richard in hotel rooms, restaurant booths, even my own backyard during a barbecue where I'd been inside getting more beer. They'd been laughing at me, literally laughing, while I played the fool. My phone rang. Lila. Jake, we need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Come home. There are some people here who want to meet with you. The line went dead, and I knew with absolute certainty that my life as I knew it was about to end. I drove home through streets that looked different now, like I was seeing them through someone else's eyes. The house I'd bought with my GI Bill benefits, the neighborhood where I'd coached Little League and shoveled elderly neighbors' driveways, it all felt foreign, like a movie set built to look like my life. There were 3 cars in my driveway, Lila's Lexus, Richard's BMW, with fresh paint covering my artwork, and a black Mercedes that belonged to Lila's parents, Tom and Marjorie Morrison. Yes, Morrison, Richard was Lila's second cousin, which added a whole new layer of sick to the situation. I walked into my own living room to find myself outnumbered and outgunned. Lila sat on the couch between her parents, looking like she was attending a funeral. Richard stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back like Napoleon surveying a battlefield. A thin man in an expensive suit, obviously a lawyer, sat in my favorite chair, briefcase open on the coffee table. Jake, Tom Morrison said without getting up. Sit down. We need to discuss your future. This is my house, I replied. I'll stand. Richard turned from the window, and I got my first close look at the man who'd been screwing my wife. He was handsome in that silver fox way that women seem to love, with perfect teeth and manicured nails that had never seen a day of honest work. Mr. Baker, he said, his voice smooth as snake oil, we all know why we're here. Your marriage to Lila is over. The question is whether we handle this like civilized adults or what? The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Baker, I'm James Whitfield, representing the Morrison family interests. We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement in exchange for an uncontested divorce and your agreement to certain discretionary clauses. He slid a document across the coffee table. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Take the money, shut your mouth, disappear quietly. How much? I asked. $200,000, Whitfield said. Plus you keep the house and your business assets? It was more money than I'd see in 5 years of construction work. Enough to start over somewhere else, maybe find a life that didn't taste like ashes and broken promises. What's the catch? No catch, Richard said, that practiced smile never wavering. Just sign the papers, make this easy on everyone, especially Emily. The mention of my daughter's name hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Lila, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing my wife's face. What about Emily? I asked. She'll be taken care of, Lila said quietly. Richard's already set up a college fund for her. Full ride to any school she wants. With his money. With clean money, Tom Morrison interjected. Money that can give her opportunities you never could. The room went silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock my father had given us as a wedding present. Everyone was watching me, waiting to see if I'd roll over and play dead like a good dog. I walked to the coffee table, picked up the pen, and held it over the signature line. Richard's smile widened. Lila let out a breath she'd been holding. Even the lawyer looked relieved. Then I set the pen down and looked Richard straight in the eye. Your phone will ring at 4 p.m., I said calmly. When it does, you'll understand why I can't sign this. Richard's smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? It means you should answer when it rings. I walked out of my own living room, leaving 5 very confused people behind me. As I reached the front door, I heard Richard say, He's bluffing. Guys like him always fold. I paused in the doorway and looked back at the man who'd stolen my family. We'll see, I said. The next morning, I moved out of my own house and into the back office of my construction company. It wasn't much, a fold-out cot, a mini fridge, and a hot plate that probably violated 6 different fire codes, but it was mine. No lies, no betrayal, no family members plotting my obsolescence. I'd made a decision sometime between leaving that room full of vultures and dawn breaking over Millfield's dying skyline. If they wanted me to be the villain in their story, I'd give them a villain they'd never forget. The first step was liquidating everything I could. I sold my tools, my equipment, even the pickup truck that had been my faithful companion for 8 years. Everything went to a dealer in Cleveland who paid cash and didn't ask questions. By the end of the week, I had $80,000 in small bills hidden in a safety deposit box across town. The second step was learning everything I could about Richard Morrison. Vince Carrera had given me more than just proof of the affair. He'd uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities that made Richard's gifts to my wife look like pocket change. Client trust funds that disappeared for weeks at a time before being mysteriously replenished. Estate settlements that took months longer than necessary while the money earned interest in accounts Richard controlled. Insurance payouts that somehow shrank between the insurance company and the beneficiaries. Richard Morrison wasn't just an adulterer. He was a thief, and he'd been stealing from his clients for years. The third step was patience. I spent my days watching, learning, documenting. I followed Richard to his private club, his favorite restaurants, his secret meetings with city officials who rubber-stamped permits and contracts. I learned his routines, his weaknesses, his tells. The man was predictable as sunrise. Every Tuesday, he had lunch with Mayor Davidson at the country club. Every Thursday, he played poker with the city council president and 2 county commissioners. Every Friday, he took a different woman to the Marriott downtown, sometimes Lila, sometimes others. Richard Morrison was a creature of habit, and habits could be exploited. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. That piece came from an unexpected source, Emily. My daughter showed up at my makeshift apartment on a rainy Thursday evening, soaked to the bone and crying like her heart was broken. She looked so young, standing in my doorway, so much like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared her. "Dad?" she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Come in, sweetheart. You're soaked." I wrapped her in a blanket and made hot chocolate on my illegal hot plate while she sat on my cot, shivering more from emotion than cold. "I heard them talking," she finally said. "Mom and Richard, they were saying things about you. Terrible things." "What kind of things?" Emily's face crumpled. "They said you were pathetic, that you were a loser who couldn't provide for his family. Richard said you were like a dog that needed to be put down." The rage that hit me was pure and clean, like white-hot metal fresh from the forge. But I kept my voice calm, gentle. "What else did they say?" "They're planning to have you committed, Dad. They found some doctor who'll say you're having a breakdown, that you're dangerous. They want to put you in a mental hospital so they can take everything." My blood turned to ice water. A psychiatric hold would destroy me completely. My business, my reputation, any chance of fighting back. It was elegant in its cruelty, the kind of move that required lawyers and money and connections I didn't have. But it also told me something important. They were scared. People don't go to such elaborate lengths to destroy someone unless they see them as a real threat. "Emily," I said carefully, "do you remember when you were little and I taught you to play chess?" She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "What's the most important rule in chess?" "Think 3 moves ahead?" "That's right. And what do you do when your opponent thinks they have you in checkmate?" Emily managed a small smile. "You show them they missed something." "Good girl. Now I need you to do something for me, and it's going to be hard. I need you to go home and pretend this conversation never happened. Can you do that?" "What are you going to do, Dad?" I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and remembering better times. "I'm going to show them they missed something." After Emily left, I called Frank and asked him to meet me at his bar. Kowalski's Tavern was the kind of place where secrets went to die. Dark wood, darker beer, and customers who minded their own business. Frank was wiping down glasses when I arrived, the universal signal that he wanted to talk privately. "You look like hell," he said without preamble. "Feel worse. I need another favor, Frank." "Name it." "I need you to spread some rumors. Nothing too specific, just hints that Richard Morrison might not be as clean as he appears. Can you do that?" Frank set down the glass he'd been polishing. "Jake, what are you planning?" "Justice." That's not an answer. I looked at my oldest friend, this man who'd pulled me out of bar fights and bad decisions more times than I could count. "They want to have me committed, Frank. Lock me up in a mental hospital and take everything I've got left." Frank's face darkened. Those bastards. So I'm going to hit them first, but I need the whole town talking about Richard before I make my move. Can you help me? Frank poured 2 shots of whiskey and slid one across the bar. What do you need me to say? Just ask questions. Wonder out loud why Richard's clients always seem to get smaller settlements than expected. Mention that you heard he's been playing fast and loose with trust funds. Nothing actionable, nothing they can sue you for, just plant seeds. We clinked glasses, and Frank downed his shot in one smooth motion. Consider it done. But Jake? Yeah? Whatever you're really planning, be careful. Men like Richard Morrison don't go down easy, and they sure as hell don't go down quiet. I finished my whiskey and headed for the door. Neither do men like me. The next morning, I put phase 2 of my plan into action. I drove to Cleveland and spent 3 hours in a print shop, creating flyers that looked like official legal documents. The header read, Notice of Investigation, Morrison, Klein, and Associates, in bold, official-looking letters. The text was carefully worded to avoid libel while still being devastating. The Ohio State Bar Association is conducting a preliminary investigation into financial irregularities at Morrison, Klein, and Associates. Clients who believe their settlements or trust funds may have been improperly handled are encouraged to contact the Bar Association's ethics hotline. I included the real ethics hotline number because I wanted people to actually call. I wanted the Bar Association flooded with complaints about Richard Morrison. That night, I distributed 500 flyers throughout Millfield. I slipped them under windshield wipers, taped them to telephone poles, left stacks in coffee shops and diners. By morning, everyone in town would be talking about Richard Morrison's legal troubles. But that was just the opening move. Phase 3 required me to break into Richard's penthouse again, but this time I wasn't going for petty vandalism. This time, I was going for his throat. Breaking into Richard's penthouse the second time felt like putting on an old, familiar coat. The security code was still his birthday, because narcissists never change, and the doorman still went home at midnight like clockwork. But this time, I came prepared. I'd spent 2 weeks studying the building's layout, memorizing the security camera positions, timing the patrol schedule of the rent-a-cop who made rounds every hour. I knew which elevator was quietest, which stairwell had the broken door alarm, and exactly how long I had between the security guards' rounds. More importantly, I knew where Richard kept his real secrets. Vince had given me architectural plans of the penthouse, public records from when it was built, and I'd noticed something interesting. The master bedroom was smaller on the blueprint than it appeared in person, which meant there was dead space behind the wall. Dead space perfect for hiding a safe. I found it behind a reproduction Monet that probably cost more than most people's cars. The painting swung away on hidden hinges, revealing a wall safe that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. Digital lock, steel construction, probably fireproof and waterproof and everything else proof. But I'd come prepared for that too. The lock-picking kit had cost me $500 and 3 days of practice on similar safes at a locksmith shop in Cleveland. The locksmith, a guy named Tony, who didn't ask questions as long as I paid cash, had taught me that most people use predictable combinations for their safes. Birthdays, anniversaries, social security numbers. Richard's combination was a 120-578, December 5th, 1978. His birthday, just like everything else in his pathetic, predictable life. The safe opened with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the silent penthouse. Inside, I found treasure. Bank statements showing offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, copies of falsified settlement documents, and a ledger detailing every penny Richard had stolen over the past 5 years. It was enough evidence to send him to federal prison for the rest of his natural life. But the real treasure was a manila folder labeled Insurance. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing Richard with various women in compromising positions. Some I recognized as clients, others as opposing counsel, a few as judges' wives. Richard Morrison had been documenting his conquests like trophies, probably for blackmail purposes. And there, in the middle of the stack, were photos of my wife. I'd thought seeing the hotel receipts and text messages was bad. I'd thought watching them together at Romano's was the worst thing I'd ever experience. But seeing actual photographs of Lila with Richard, seeing the look on her face as she betrayed 20 years of marriage, nearly brought me to my knees. But I didn't have time for grief. I had work to do. I photographed every document, every bank statement, every piece of evidence in that safe. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the safe, and repositioned the fake Monet. But before I left, I had one more surprise for Richard. I'd brought a friend with me tonight, a fat brown rat I'd caught in the basement of my construction office. The rat was very much alive and very unhappy about being stuffed in a cardboard box for the past 2 hours. I opened Lila's designer purse, the one she'd left on Richard's kitchen counter, and deposited my furry friend inside, along with a handful of the rat pellets I'd been feeding him. Then I zipped the purse shut and left it exactly where I'd found it. By the time I reached the lobby, I was smiling for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I called the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Cleveland Field Office. I'd like to report financial crimes involving a law firm in Millfield, Ohio. Hold, please. I'll transfer you to white-collar crime. Agent Sarah Martinez sounded tired when she picked up the phone, like she'd been dealing with cranks and conspiracy theorists all morning. But her tone changed when I started talking about offshore accounts and falsified settlement documents. Sir, I'm going to need you to come in and make a formal statement. Can you be here this afternoon? I'll be there at 2 o'clock. And sir, bring any evidence you have, all of it. I spent the morning making copies of everything I'd photographed in Richard's safe. Bank records, settlement documents, the insurance photos, everything except the pictures of Lila. Those I kept for myself, for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. The FBI office in Cleveland was exactly what you'd expect. Gray walls, gray carpet, gray people in gray suits asking gray questions. Agent Martinez was different, though. She had sharp eyes and sharper questions, and she didn't waste time on small talk. How did you obtain this evidence, Mr. Baker? Anonymous source. Mr. Baker, I need you to understand something. If this evidence was obtained illegally, we can't use it in court, but we can use it to guide our investigation. I met her eyes. I understand. She spent 2 hours going through every document, asking questions, taking notes. When she was finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me. Mr. Morrison has been on our radar for a while, she said finally. We've had complaints from clients, but never enough evidence to move forward. This changes things. How long before you arrest him? These things take time. We'll need to verify the offshore accounts, interview clients, build a case that will stick. Could be weeks, could be months. I don't have months. Agent Martinez closed the file folder. Mr. Baker, I'm going to give you some advice. Go home, file for divorce, and let us handle Richard Morrison. Don't try to be a hero. I stood up and shook her hand. Thank you for your time, Agent Martinez. Mr. Baker, stay out of trouble. I walked out of the FBI office knowing I was about to do exactly the opposite. That evening, I drove past my old house, the house where I'd lived for 15 years, where I'd taught Emily to ride a bike and held Lila through her mother's funeral. The lights were on in the living room, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, my family living their lives without me. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. We need to talk. Meet me at Romano's tomorrow night at 8. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'll be there. It was time for the next phase of my plan. Romano's looked different at night, all soft lighting and romantic atmosphere designed to make cheating spouses feel better about their life choices. I arrived early and chose a corner booth where I could see the entire restaurant, a habit I'd picked up from too many action movies and not enough real-world experience with espionage. Lila walked in at exactly 8 o'clock, looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. The black dress was new, probably another gift from Richard, and her hair was styled in a way that made her look younger, more vibrant. She looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, which made what I was about to do that much harder. She slid into the booth across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. You look good, she said finally. You look expensive. Lila flinched. Jake, please. Can we try to be civilized about this? Civilized. That's an interesting word choice, considering. The waiter appeared, young and eager, and completely oblivious to the domestic drama unfolding at table 12. Lila ordered wine, something French and pretentious that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. I ordered coffee, black. How's Emily? I asked. She misses you. Not enough to call. She's confused, Jake. This is hard on her, too. I leaned forward. You know what would make it easier? The truth. Lila's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. What truth? The truth about you and Richard, the truth about the money, the truth about how long you've been planning to destroy me. I never wanted to destroy you. No, you just wanted to erase me. Pretend I never existed, that our marriage was just some inconvenient phase you went through before you found your real life. The restaurant buzzed with conversation around us, other couples sharing intimate dinners, celebrating anniversaries, falling in love. We were the only ones falling apart. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Lila said quietly. Richard and I, it just happened. Bullshit. Affairs don't just happen. They're planned, executed, covered up. How long, Lila? How long have you been lying to me? She took a long sip of wine before answering. 8 months. And the money? The gifts? The $50,000 he's given you? Lila's eyes widened. How do you? I know everything. The offshore accounts, the stolen settlement money, the photographs he keeps in his safe. I know about Maggie feeding him information about me. I know about the plan to have me committed. I know it all. The color drained from Lila's face. Jake, you don't understand. Richard isn't... He's not what you think he is. You're right. He's worse. He's dangerous, Jake. If he finds out you know about his business, let me worry about Richard. Lila reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her skin was soft, manicured, unmarked by honest work. Please just take the settlement money and leave town. Start over somewhere else. You could be happy. I looked down at her hand on mine, remembering when those same fingers had worn my grandmother's wedding ring with pride instead of shame. What about Emily? She'll understand when she's older. Richard can give her opportunities you never could. With stolen money. With clean money, once this all settles down. I pulled my hand away. There's something you need to know, Lila. Something about your boyfriend that might change your perspective. What? I gave everything to the FBI this morning. Bank records, settlement documents, evidence of every crime Richard's committed over the past 5 years. They're building a case against him right now. Lila's wineglass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending red wine splashing across her expensive dress like blood. The entire restaurant turned to look at our table, conversation stopping mid-sentence. You didn't, she whispered. I did. And there's more. Those flyers that have been circulating around town, I made those. The rumors about Richard's business practices, I started those. The rat in your purse yesterday morning. That was me too. You're insane. No, I'm thorough. There's a difference. Lila stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. You've destroyed everything. Richard will lose his license, his practice, everything. And for what? Revenge? Justice. This isn't justice, Jake. This is spite. I stood up and threw a 20 on the table to cover my coffee. You're right. Justice would be Richard in prison and you living in a trailer park, wondering how you're going to pay for Emily's college with food stamps and regret. I hate you, she said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Good. Hate's honest. It's the first honest thing you've said to me in 8 months. I walked out of Romano's feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Phase 4 was complete. Now it was time for the finale. The call came at 3:47 p.m. the next day, while I was sitting in my makeshift apartment, watching the local news report on allegations of financial impropriety at Morrison, Klein & Associates. My phone rang, and Richard Morrison's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Jake Baker. You bastard. Richard's voice was tight with rage and fear. What did you do? I don't know what you're talking about. The FBI raided my office this morning. They seized my computers, my files, everything. They had a warrant, Jake. A federal warrant. That sounds serious. You think you're clever? You think you've won? I'll destroy you. I'll take everything you have left. I looked around my pathetic little room, the folding cot, the hot plate, the cardboard boxes that contained the remnants of my old life. What exactly are you going to take, Richard? My cot? My hot plate? You already took everything that mattered. I'll take your daughter. I'll turn her against you so completely she'll never speak to you again. I'll make sure everyone in this town knows what a pathetic loser you are. You're welcome to try. There was a long pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more calculated. You have no idea what you've started, Jake. No idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do. I'm dealing with a small-town lawyer who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. I'm dealing with a man who's about to lose everything he's stolen over the years. I'm dealing with a coward who hides behind other people's money and other people's wives. We'll see about that. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair and smiled. In 13 minutes, Richard Morrison's phone would ring again, and this time it would be Agent Martinez calling to inform him that he was about to be indicted on 17 federal charges. I'd told him his phone would ring at 4 p.m. I was a man of my word. The next morning brought news that spread through Millfield like wildfire. Richard Morrison had been arrested at his penthouse at 4:17 p.m. the previous day, charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and theft from client trust accounts. The local paper ran a front-page story with a photo of Richard in handcuffs, his perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled. I bought 5 copies of the paper and had them framed. But the real satisfaction came from watching the dominoes fall. Morrison, Klein, and Associates collapsed within 48 hours as clients fled and partners scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Lila was fired immediately, guilt by association and the fact that she'd received $50,000 in gifts from a man who'd stolen over $2 million from his clients. The Lexus was repossessed. The jewelry was seized as evidence. The house, our house, went into foreclosure when Lila couldn't make the mortgage payments on her suddenly non-existent income. Emily called me on Thursday evening, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things about you, and I believed their lies, and now Mom won't stop crying, and everything's falling apart, and I don't know what to do." "Where are you now, sweetheart?" "At Grandma and Grandpa Morrison's house. But they're talking about selling it to pay for Richard's lawyers, and Mom just sits in her room all day, and I'm scared, Dad. I'm really scared." "Pack a bag," I said. "I'm coming to get you." "But where will we live? You don't even have a real apartment." "We'll figure it out. We're bakers, remember? We're tougher than we look." I picked Emily up an hour later. She ran out of her grandparents' mansion like it was on fire, carrying a duffel bag and her laptop. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. "I saw the news," she said as we drove away from the Morrison family compound, "about Richard getting arrested. Did you really do that?" I gave the FBI evidence of his crimes. They did the rest. Good. He deserved it. They all deserved it. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, through streets I'd known my entire life, past the mill where my father had worked for 30 years before it closed, past the high school where I'd met Lila at a basketball game in 1998. "Dad? Yeah? What happens now?" I thought about that question as we pulled into the parking lot of my construction office. What did happen now? I'd gotten my revenge, destroyed the people who'd betrayed me, proven that the harmless loser they'd dismissed was capable of bringing down their entire world. But revenge, I was learning, was like Chinese food, satisfying in the moment, but leaving you hungry an hour later. "Now we rebuild," I said. "We start over, and we do it right this time. Together, together." The final act of my revenge came 3 weeks later, at Richard Morrison's bail hearing. I sat in the back of the courtroom, wearing my best suit and a tie Emily had picked out for me. Richard looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, diminished somehow, like a balloon with half the air let out. His lawyer, a public defender since all his assets had been frozen, was young and nervous and clearly in over his head. The prosecutor was Agent Martinez, who traded her gray FBI suit for a sharp black courtroom ensemble. She presented the case methodically, devastating in its simplicity. Richard Morrison had stolen $2.3 million from his clients over 5 years, used the money to fund an extravagant lifestyle, and attempted to cover his tracks through an elaborate shell game of offshore accounts and falsified documents. "Your Honor," Martinez said, "the defendant is a flight risk with access to significant offshore assets. The government requests that bail be denied." Richard's lawyer stood up, fumbling with his notes. "Your Honor, my client has deep ties to the community. His family has lived in Millfield for 3 generations. He's not going anywhere." Judge Patricia Hendricks, a woman I'd known since high school, whose kitchen I'd renovated 2 years ago, looked down at Richard with the expression of someone who'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "you've been charged with 17 federal crimes involving the theft of over $2 million. You've shown a pattern of deception and financial manipulation spanning multiple years. The court finds that you pose both a flight risk and a danger to the community you've spent years victimizing." She banged her gavel. "Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial." Richard's face crumpled. He turned around, scanning the courtroom, and his eyes found mine. For a moment, we stared at each other across the room, the man who'd stolen my family and the man who'd destroyed his life in return. I smiled and gave him a little wave. As the bailiff led Richard away in shackles, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, exactly, but a deep, satisfying sense that the scales had been balanced. Outside the courthouse, I found Lila waiting by my truck. She looked terrible, thin, pale, wearing clothes I recognized from years ago. The designer wardrobe was gone, along with everything else Richard had given her. "Jake," she said, "we need to talk." "I think we've said everything we need to say." "Please, 5 minutes." I checked my watch. 5 minutes. "I know you hate me. I know I deserve it, but Emily needs stability, and I can't give that to her right now. I'm living in a studio apartment above the dry cleaner, working at a temp agency. I can barely afford groceries." "What do you want from me, Lila?" "I want you to take Emily. Full custody. She needs you, and you're the only one who can give her the life she deserves." I stared at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. What about you? I'll figure something out. I always do. And Richard? Lila's laugh was bitter. Richard won't be a factor for the next 20 to 30 years, assuming he doesn't get killed in prison. He might not. White-collar criminals usually go to minimum security facilities, more like summer camp than prison. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand that your boyfriend got off easy. If I'd wanted to really destroy him, I would have leaked those photos to his wife instead of turning them over to the FBI. Lila's eyes widened. You have photos. Had. I gave them to Agent Martinez as evidence, but I made copies first, just in case. Jake, please. Relax. I'm not going to use them. I got what I wanted. What did you want? I looked at this woman I'd loved for 20 years, this stranger who'd shared my bed and borne my child and plotted my destruction. I wanted you to understand that actions have consequences. I wanted Richard to pay for what he stole, and I wanted Emily to see that her old man isn't as helpless as everyone thought. You got all of that. Yeah, I did. Lila reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. The divorce papers. I've already signed them. You can have everything. The house, the business, Emily. I won't fight you. I took the envelope, but didn't open it. What will you do? My cousin in Denver said I could stay with her for a while. Maybe go back to school, get a teaching certificate, start over somewhere nobody knows what I did. That might be best. Jake? Yeah? I'm sorry, for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. I looked at Lila one last time, memorizing her face, trying to remember the good times before everything went wrong. I know, I said, and for what it's worth, I forgive you. She started crying then, standing in the courthouse parking lot in her second-hand clothes, crying for everything she'd lost and everything she'd thrown away. I got in my truck and drove home to Emily, who was waiting with Chinese takeout and a smile that reminded me why some things were worth fighting for. 6 months later, I stood in the driveway of our house, Emily's and mine now, watching her practice parallel parking in the used Honda Civic I'd bought for her 17th birthday. The foreclosure had been canceled when I paid off the mortgage with money from Richard's frozen accounts, money the FBI had released to his victims as restitution. The house looked different now, brighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from its foundation. Emily had redecorated her room, painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow, and filled the refrigerator with photos of her friends and school activities. My business was thriving again. Word had gotten around that Jake Baker was the guy who'd brought down Richard Morrison, and suddenly everyone wanted to hire the man who'd outsmarted the smartest lawyer in town. I had more work than I could handle, and enough money to hire 3 full-time employees. Richard Morrison pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He'd be eligible for parole in 8 years, assuming he kept his nose clean and his mouth shut. Lila had moved to Denver and was working as a substitute teacher while taking night classes to get her certification. She called Emily every Sunday and sent birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside. Emily was thriving. Her grades had improved, she'd made new friends, and she'd started dating a kid named Marcus who treated her with the kind of respect I'd tried to model for her growing up. She was planning to study engineering in college, following in her old man's footsteps but aiming higher than I'd ever dreamed. "Dad," she called from the car. "Did you see that? Perfect parallel park." "I saw it, sweetheart. You're ready for your test." She bounded out of the car and hugged me, 18 years old and full of possibilities. "Are you proud of me?" she asked. I looked at my daughter, smart, strong, resilient, and felt my chest swell with emotion. "Every single day," I said. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat on my front porch with a beer and thought about the man I'd been a year ago. Broken, defeated, dismissed by everyone who was supposed to love me. They'd called me a loser, a failure, a pathetic excuse for a husband and father. They'd been wrong. I wasn't the villain in their story. I was the hero in mine. And sometimes being the hero means doing whatever it takes to protect the people you love, even if it makes you look like the bad guy to everyone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Drink at the bar tomorrow? I'm buying." I typed back, "Sure, we're celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" I looked up at the stars, clear and bright in the Ohio sky, and smiled. "Winning."